right? We start off talking about the history of psychological science and research design. Okay, two fundamental pieces of our success. This is why we are science. One of the first things I had you guys write out about is psychology a science? That's kind of a challenging question. Most of us, when we think about science, we're really thinking about these really concrete things like gravity, like the quality of rocks, like the positioning of stars, like the reactions in chemistry. Psychology is a science because we follow the scientific method. Okay, but here's one of the most fascinating things about this science is that it evolves as culture evolves. A few things just right off the top of my head that I can share with you. We did not have the scientific study of positive psychology until about 20 years ago. And now that's how most of you understand psychology. That's how most of you have come to think about self-help, to think about self-care, to think about the ways that we take care of ourselves and the way that we serve others. That is positive psychology. Another just random thing that shows you that psychology is related to our culture. Homosexuality was listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as a disorder until 1974. Okay? It's no longer listed in our manual as a disease or a disorder. What has most recently been added is obesity and eating disorders associated with those individuals that compulsively consume, obviously without binging and purging. Okay? Because we've had bulimia in that Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for a long period of time. There are so many things that we are looking at. And I'll tell you guys right now, COVID is ripe with social data, ripe with psychology, ripe with so many things that we're going to have to learn and re-understand and reimagine about how we interact and engage in a culture. So we're going to talk about the history and the science. In all of our contexts, right, even throughout Blackboard, we list out these learning objectives. So today, we're going to spend some time on history. You're going to get to learn about the founding fellows. I used to call them the old white dudes lecture, and for woke reasons, I don't think that that's appropriate anymore. We can talk about how white males were privileged class and were the only people allowed pen and paper and allowed to publish and allowed to speak on scientific matters for a very extended period of time, and we still encounter limits today. So now we call them the founding fellows instead of just the old white dudes. We're also going to talk about research, articulating the difference between various research methodologies. You guys are going to prepare for that conversation on Wednesday. And then positive psychology, right? What makes positive psychology a thing? So here are a few things. The American Psychological Association suggests that we highlight a few parameters that psychology really works to focus on operating in. And that first one is diversity. We want to speak to phenomenon, that means human behavior, mental process, across all variations of humanity. So anybody want to guess how poorly of a job we've done of that? Do you think we've done a good job or a bad job? Give me a thumbs up if you think we've done a good job. In real life, give me a thumbs up. Have we done a good job? Have we done a bad job? Show me if we've done a bad job. I can see you guys were all waiting for the thumbs down. I'm going to go ahead and pop over here. Would somebody bravely, not a TA, unmute themselves and put yourself out there and share with us quickly what you think we haven't done well? And if you have a thought why you think we haven't done it well. Anybody want to share? Should I ask somebody to unmute?
I unmuted.
Oh, beautiful. Go for it.
I think like this is just a generic example, but
okay,
like women have been discriminated in terms of like mental health with the whole hysteria and all those kinds of things. And there's women across the world. So if we're doing that in like minority groups of people, like humans, if you're male or female, then we obviously have done it with like minority groups and other people.
Yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, when we differentiate or we ignore a gender, we're automatically cutting out 50% of the population, independent of ethnicity, race, and resources. So you're right. I mean, that's one of our biggest cuts. What she's mentioning is this idea of hysteria. The concept of hysteria first showed up back in Greek and Roman times, where they believed women's uteruses would detach and they would float throughout their body, causing them to be emotionally discombobulated and hysterical and cry a lot. Hence the name hysterectomy, right? I mean, that represents your uterus. And, you know, culturally, women have been assigned the majority of that. Women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with a mental health issue, but part of that for us is culturally, women are also more likely to seek help, right? They're more likely to present with symptoms and want to have some solution for those symptoms. All right, does anybody else bravely just want to just unmute yourself and yeet yourself into the unknown of the arena and put it out there?
Um, well,
Awesome.
I believe that there are different times where we have, when it comes to ethnicities, or definitely like different races, like ever since like we have colonized the America or the North America, we have been struggling with Native Americans and um, forcing them through things such as the Trail of Tears and putting them in decreasing their lands despite their cultures, and not to mention the social injustice that has been um, brought up due to social media about Black Lives Matters, and how that has radically changed the views of modern day society.
Absolutely, right? And just the focus and the shift on indigenous peoples, and the struggle that they are encountering right now. One of the points that I want to make on why this diversity is so important is because we want to speak to the full human experience. Now, I'm going to be straight up with you guys. Here are our limitations. One, the majority of the research that we're going to talk about in this class has been done in America. Okay, so we're not going to get a worldwide perspective in here. Two, the American Psychiatric Association is a bunch of old white dudes here in America. There is another diagnostic manual that's used internationally that takes into consideration cultural variations, different traditions, um, lots of other things. So when we think about diversity, we are a work in progress. We are definitely a work in progress. The other thing you guys will experience yourselves that we'll start talking about probably on Wednesday is research. The majority of research is conducted on college students. Do you think college students represent the full range of the human experience? They don't. And I know you know that because you know plenty of people who aren't here that represent the human experience. So diversity is something that we are definitely working on. We're working on reaching as many people as possible. The next piece that I want to speak to, thank you for that, Allison, is ethics. Do right, do no harm, and be true. Now, because this is a science that is informed by culture, we are influenced by culture. I've already shared with you guys 3 different examples today on how our diagnostic and statistical manual and our science has evolved just in this short period of time. The age group that the developmental span that the majority of you are in right now is what we call emerging adulthood. And that wasn't even a thing until the year 2000. Because college wasn't the given. College wasn't something that everybody assumed to be happening all the time until about the year, like the late 90s, where it was really clear that because of college, we're having this sort of extended adolescence, but we really couldn't call it an adolescence because legally you were an adult. And so now we have this emerging adult piece. But when it comes to ethics, we've done a lot of messed up stuff. We've done a lot of stuff that allowed us to take advantage of disadvantaged people. We've done a lot of stuff that didn't account for possible and future ramifications. Today, this is the reason why we have an internal review board, an institutional review board, which requires that all experiments that wish to be published has to go through a review process to ensure that we are not doing any harm and we are behaving as ethically as possible. Now, a continuum, I think this is one of my favorite things, and it could be just because I'm a developmental psychologist, but when we look at human behavior, there's no normal. There's no normal. When we say, you know, normally kids will be, you know, have at least 50 words by the time that they're 12 months old. That sucks. right? Because that's not really right. Because some kids, when they're 9 months old, have 50 words. Some kids don't get 50 words until they're 18 months. And what do you think happens to that parent who has a 12-month-old who doesn't have 50 words? They start to freak out. They start to freak out. They start to think something's wrong with their kid. And then they start to do all of these interventions. Well, they just have just a slightly different developmental trajectory. We don't worry about the kids that start earlier, right? Because, oh, well, they're savants, right? They're geniuses. We give them all different labels. But in actuality, our development, our behavior is all in a continuum. There is no black or white in our science. There's no good or evil. There's no right or wrong. So looking at these three things alone, diversity, ethics, and continuum, these are the things that we have to focus on as a science, and that we work to conduct good studies to ensure that we maintain this. The next one is application. And I think this is the best one, especially in this class, and one of the things that we really focus on, and you've already demonstrated, right? What does the science mean in your life? What does the science have to do with you? What is the science? How does it serve you? What can it do for you? What does it mean? How can you use it? All of the above, focusing on applications. It used to be the case that we did a lot of studies where they were just sort of theoretical investigations. We weren't really worried about what they meant or how we could actually use them. Today, we know that time and people are precious, and anytime we're collecting data, we want to make sure that there's something we're actually going to be able to do it to leverage your life, to make your life better, to improve things for you, to help you become a better person, to maybe change your environment so you can excel. And maybe even help you understand and provide intervention and care for other people. These are the ones we're going to focus on. There's one that's not pictured here, and that's Gestalt Psychology. So those are our founding fellows, and here are the things that they did. These are sort of their primary claims to fame. Okay, their primary claims to fame. And so I'm just going to give you a minute, and what I want you to do is I want you to just try to match things up here for yourself. You can go ahead and make note of this somewhere, do whatever works for you to sort of log and identify how these things line up. Now, while I didn't make it part of this task to identify the picture with the person with the thing that they did, that's also fun as well. So, number one is Barius Frederick, okay, also known as B.F. Skinner. He is a behaviorist that focused on reinforcement. He primarily used pigeons and cats, and he would develop these really elaborate boxes. And in these boxes, he would just watch these primal instinct-based animals and watch them to learn how they learned, basically. Like, what is it that got that mouse to go up to the lever, to press the lever, to drop the food? He really believed in what we call Thorndike's law of effect, which meant that every single behavior had a reinforcing or a punishing response. And so he really focused on controlling environments to get like mice, rats, and pigeons and cats to do these really intricate tasks. But he's the reason why we talk today a lot about positive reinforcement when we talk about working with kids. Like, how are you going to get kids to do what you need them to do? You give them something that encourages their behavior. And we'll talk more about the nuances of this type of behaviorism known as operant conditioning when we get into our learning content. All right, how about 2, Darwin? What did Darwin do? Give me the letter. Yeah, all right, H, right? He wouldn't have considered himself an evolutionary psychologist just because he was so much before psychology's time. He wouldn't have recognized himself as a psychologist, but we consider him an evolutionary psychologist because he worked to explain these adaptations in these animals contingent upon their environment. And the adaptations really focused on those things that would ensure their survival. Evolutionary psychology is one of the sexy psychologies right now. We've really kind of returned to evolutionary psychology to explain a lot of human behavior and mental processes. We've looked to how does this behavior serve you and ensure your survival later on. We'll talk not too much about evolutionary psychology, but we'll see it pop up quite a bit throughout motivation. All right. Oh, by the way, this is Darwin. That guy. Oh, not that guy. The center bottom one. How about W. James, William James? C, studied the functions of the mind. Okay, awesome, awesome. Yes, William James is C. Okay, he studied the functions of the mind. He wanted to understand why things were the way that they were. So one of the things that William James would do is he would place an object in front of one of his participants, and he would say, describe this to me. Okay, and he would really rely on your sensory experience of things. And so he tried to figure out how things were used. He really believed in what we call the stream of consciousness, which is this sort of free construction of understanding and self from our mental constructions. Okay, he believed in the stream of consciousness, which meant that basically anything that you were thinking was real or based upon your reality. All right, how about John Watson? Give us John Watson. What do you think? What letter's John Watson? Yeah, tortured a little boy to support behaviorism. Yes, I like to refer to John Watson. Does anybody know how I like to refer to John Watson? If you do, put it in the chat. I refer to John Watson, he's D for a reason, as the devil. Right? I make the association. In the clinical trials mask, which I'll show you guys, is, thank you for that, Brendan. He is a bad dude. But one of the tools that he used to scare little Albert was he put on a devil's mask. So I call John Watson the devil. He's a pretty trippy dude, and we'll get into him also when we talk about learning. But he's one of the reasons why we have classical conditioning, why we understand how advertising works today. As much as we don't like John Watson, and he did very unethical things when we think about that thread, he still contributed quite a bit. John Watson is this suave dude up here in the upper left-hand corner. Upper left-hand corner, he's got the part that's almost down the middle. He's got the spectacles. He's got a little bow tie. Get his hair did. Blow dry his nails. All right. How about Abraham Maslow? Abraham Maslow. Go ahead and give me whichever letter you think Abraham Maslow contributed to our science. B, yes, humanism, right? Humanistic psychology. He really believed people are good. He's the one right next to John Watson. He reminds me of a Muppet. I just think he's adorable and very sweet. He was actually probably the youngest of the psychologists that we're talking about, but he really believed that we needed to look at people as good and people that wanted to do good. He really believed in person empowerment. His research informed a lot of motivational theory. Of course, we'll talk about him when we get to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but his theory and the people that he worked with also really informed personality and therapy. Okay, so we'll talk some more about humanism. He does look like such a nice guy, sweet, sweet fellow. Who knows? Who knows? All right, what about Gestalt psychology? Go ahead and give me a letter for that one. F, yes, a group of psychologists that look at the whole. We will, Gestalt psychology is fascinating. So what we had is we had William James, we had Wilhelm Wundt, we had all of these psychologists that were really interested in teasing apart all of these nuanced aspects of human behavior. And Gestalt psychologists came along and said, okay, now wait a minute here. There's more to this, right? If we pick apart everything, right, and we just look at those parts, we're really missing the whole. We're missing the whole thing. And so that's why Gestalt psychologists say that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which means that understanding something in its entirety carries different meaning, weight, and nuance than if we look at the little bits and pieces associated with it. All right, how about Freud? Freud is this grumpy looking dude up here in the top right corner, right? He was our first clinical psychologist, and I guarantee the majority of you have some reference associated with Freud. He's the most popular psychologist used throughout movies and media. Freud was an equally bad dude, addicted to cocaine. He would sleep with his patients, was very incredibly narcissistic. He did believe in recreational cocaine use. In fact, we do believe that that's probably one of the things that killed him, in addition to his constant cigarette smoking. He looks like the exact opposite of Maslow. Well, I didn't do the guy any favors. I did put up the grumpiest looking picture there was of him. So there's my bias right there. But ironically, right, remember, if I were to trace my theoretical lineage all the way back to these, you know, founding fellows, Freud would be my dude, which is kind of hard for me, but it's the truth. It's the truth. All right, Wilhelm Wundt, it's the only one that we have left. It's A. William Wundt is A. He's the father of psychology. He ran our very first psychological lab. And in years previous, I would normally demonstrate this on a TA, but one of the things that William Wundt did, and for those of you that are zooming in and unable to see this live and in person, I'm placing my finger in 2 points on my back. And so William Wundt's first experiment was like this. He would have participants, they would use an equally spaced 2-pointed entity, and they would place it on the participant's back, and they would have to guess about how far apart they were. And then they would put their hand behind their back, and they would place 2 points on the hand, and the individual would have to guess where those 2 points were. Well, what William Wundt learned in this very first experiment, in the first psychological lab, is that there were more sensory neurons in the hand than there were in the back. So he, right, where William James studied the functions of the mind, right, Wilhelm Wundt was focused on the structures. He's the person that helped us understand the sensory motor cortex in our brain and how we have the homunculus, right? This, if we were to distribute all of our neurons proportionally, we would have huge sensory systems, huge hands and feet, because we have more touch receptors in our hands than we do our back. And, right, this is early science, and that simple question, right, highlighted what we study today in neuroscience. So while these founding fellows, right, they're just a bunch of old white dudes, they started our science and created the opportunity for us to really look at things in a critical and evaluative way. And that's one of the ways that we became an official science, if you will.